Hi, I'm Max Keiser, and welcome to the Keiser Report. Controversy swirling around the world, not just dirty, corrupt bankers, but dirty, corrupt rating agencies, dirty and corrupt economists who fail to see the big picture as we do on this show. We give it to you raw. We give it to you straight. We give it to you real. Let's go to Stacy Herbert. Stacy Herbert, give us some of that real stuff.
Max, I have a lot of real stuff. First, I have a real beef with you.
What?
I deposited a €50 note that you gave me into my bank account yesterday, and the whole machine shut down. Guards came to me and said it was a counterfeit €50 note.
Yeah, now that's the €50 note that you gave me. Okay, you're hanging money. You're passing bad bills.
Well, speaking of bad bills, this is indirectly in my first headline, Max. China's gold demand surges 26% in Q2 WGC. This is WGC is the World Gold Council, and they report China's gold demand in the April-June period reached 111.7 tons, making the nation the world's second largest consumer of the precious metal after India. Max Keiser, you said this would happen.
That's right. Of course, Chinese people watch this show. They know that the global fiat currency world is collapsing, and they're buying gold to protect themselves, of course. Also, in China, there's a history. You know, the first fortune you make in China, you put away in gold. Then you worry about your second fortune. That's the tradition.
Is that what Confucius Max say?
This is what Confucius Max says. Put all of your money into gold bullion that you have in savings, and then you go build your second fortune. The first fortune always goes into gold bullion.
Well, 48% of the total Chinese demand is from the retail consumer. They, in total, bought 36.3 tons, compared to Americans who bought 30.3 tons. So you see this rise of the Chinese consumer, fall of the American consumer.
You can do better, China. You can do better, Chinese consumers. Buy more gold. You should be buying 3 to 4 times more gold than in the U.S., because the U.S. economy, of course, is shrinking. What else? What else? Tell us more.
Well, just to put this into context, because this is gold that you've been telling everybody is the way to protect from fake currency and fake fiat currencies. The total gold demand, according to the World Gold Council, last year was up 36% to 1,050 tons. But in the U.S., as we were talking about, it's also been a record year. U.S. home sales in record July slump. This is existing home sales, and it was a 27% slump in July home sales, which has intensified fears of a U.S. double-dip recession, according to the article. This notion that there's somehow a double dip, that it wasn't a continuous collapse.
Yeah, that's false, isn't it? You see, we hit peak credit in 2007. We hit peak asset inflation in 2007, and it's been unwinding since then. When Obama came into office, he threw some money in there, threw some more fiat currency into the bonfire, and it created in 2009 a bit of an uptick, a bit of a blip. But now that blip, that sugar high, is worn off, and the primary trend is down. Housing prices are still going down. Wages are still going down. Unemployment is still going up. And here's the thing. Banks in the U.S., principally, still have on their books hundreds of billions and trillions of bad debts related to real estate. Ben Bernanke just said that he is unwilling to disclose exactly how much more bad real estate mortgage paper the Fed owns at this juncture, because the implication is that the American people can't take the truth. They're hiding the truth from the American people. That's why no matter how much fiat currency they throw at this thing, it doesn't cause any inflation, because the banks just say, oh, wait a minute, we got that many more bad debts on our books. They fail to disclose. That's tyranny, my friend. That is tyranny. They're withholding from the American public vital information about their fiscal and monetary and national wealth and health. That's unconscionable.
Well, there's further distress in the U.S. home market as well in the following headline. New home sales plunge 12.4%. So the previous number was existing home sales. This one is a plunge in the new home sales. So wherever you look in the U.S. economy, it's starting to really accelerate down again.
There's a boom in the sale of tents, though, as people start living more in tents.
Well, all of us may be living in tents soon if you look at the next headline. Record heat. 9 nations that topped their highest temperatures this summer. And they talk about 2010 as the year of global weirding.
Global weirding? Look, folks, that's not right. You know what the real problem is. It's global warming and climate change brought about by over-industrialization. And nobody has put the adequate cost of their carbon emissions on their balance sheet. The big oil companies, for example, don't cost the expense of their detritus, of their exhaust. They don't pay for that exhaust. They don't pay for the damage that they do. No wonder they make money. They don't actually pay for the raw material that goes into their product and the waste that it creates. Now, the result is the worst, what is it, decade or year on
record temperatures forever for the existence of historical records for these 9 nations.
No, thanks, big corporations around the world. Thanks for causing premature human extinction. Thanks a lot.
Well, let's go through some of the photos, and you mentioned the cost. Number 1 is Pakistan, and they set a record temperature for Pakistan, but also all of Asia at 128.3 degrees Fahrenheit. And right now, of course, 20% of the nation of Pakistan is underwater.
Well, see, the globe is, you could make it up in terms of the climate debts that were incurred by the developed countries like the U.S. and Britain. And they're owed to these countries like Pakistan who have had to bear the brunt of these climate debts. And the reason why climate denial is such a huge industry in America is because people in the U.S. don't want to pay their climate debts. They're deadbeats, basically.
Well, let's go over the following 8. We'll just look at the pictures. Russia, Colombia, Finland, Iraq, Sudan, Cyprus, Myanmar, and the Solomon Islands. They also set record temperatures this year. But let's move on to the next headline because that's just for the summer. The next headline, heat record set in 17 countries so far. This is for the whole year. So again, we're talking about a record year for many things, including these temperatures. So Jeff Masters, who is a meteorologist, this is the largest area of Earth's surface to experience all-time record high temperatures in any single year in the historical record.
Okay, well, I mean, how many people are going to be homeless as a result of this? The number of climate refugees is growing by hundreds of thousands now per year.
Max, you're like Dr. Evil. There's about 20 million homeless in Pakistan at the moment.
Okay, so you've got millions, tens of millions of homeless due to climate change and global warming. A few nations now underwater. And becoming even more underwater than the U.S. housing market.
Speaking of global weirding, though, Max.
Yes.
It's also been a record year for payouts to zombies. The next headline, Minneapolis will pay $165,000 to zombies. So this is the Minneapolis City Attorney's Office has decided to pay 7 zombies and their attorney $165,000. The payout settles a federal lawsuit the 7 filed after they were arrested and jailed for 2 days for dressing up like zombies in downtown Minneapolis in July 2006 to protest mindless consumerism.
There's a bull market in zombies. You know.
Well, this is a notion that you've brought up many times before on this show, is that the zombie economy, the zombie consumer, these people are just zombies.
Look, the economy is dead, so they're giving it a blood transfusion of worthless credit, which causes some little ripples in the flesh of the economy, but it's still dead. So you've got zombies now being attacked by other zombies in an attempt to create some kind of zombie fest. When I was a kid, we had Woodstock. You know, now it's going to be zombie stock. Global celebration of zombies and vampires. No wonder there's so many vampire movies out there. People are just forgetting getting real jobs, and they're just learning how to suck the blood out of their fellow zombie.
But on the positive side of this is to, as the American economy, the banking system, the political system, and society and the environment become more and more zombified, hopefully, there seems to be a way to make some money as a zombie by suing the police.
Well, I mean, the police, however, as we covered during the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention during the big presidential election in 2008, the police were able to buy insurance protecting them against breaking the law.
That was in Minneapolis. So
in Minneapolis.
Perhaps they could be buying insurance to protect them from arresting the wrong zombies.
That's right. You need zombie insurance now. In case you arrest the wrong zombie, as a police, you'll be indemnified against any wrongful arrest of a zombie if you buy zombie insurance. This could be another billion-dollar.com business. Zombieinsurance.com going public now with a valuation on some private market exchange of excess of Facebook, which now has a valuation of $30 billion.
But so finally, Max, speaking of zombies, the two biggest zombie economies stalking the globe, of course, is Japan, which has been a zombie for 20 years, and the U.S. USD JPY in free fall. This is, look at this chart, this is the dollar crashing against the yen last week. But it just shows you the volatility of these zombie economies and their zombie fiat currencies, which relates to our first headline that we opened with, which is the Chinese consumers diving into gold, finding something that has a real, that's not going to be so volatile like these zombie currencies and economies around the world.
Look, the Japanese yen is the prettiest horse in the currency glue factory at the moment. Okay, people are unwinding their bad derivative bets, and they're trying to drive a silver spike through the heart of various vampires and zombies, whether it's Geithner or Summers or Bernanke. I see that Huffington Post has got a big headline this week. Get rid of Summers and Bernanke and Geithner. You can't get rid of a vampire and a zombie just by wishing them away. You need to drive a silver spike through their hearts. Ariana Huffington, come on this show and I'll explain that to you, darling. But where was I?
I think you were going to say bye now and stay tuned for our second half of the show.
Sounds good to me. I'm still thinking about that paper hanging scandal. Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on this part of the show.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away, much more coming your way, so stay right there.
Every month we give you the future. We help you understand how we'll get there and what tomorrow will bring. The best in science and technology from across Russia and around the world. Join us for Technology Update on RT.
Hungry for the full story? We've got it firsthand. The biggest issues get a human voice, face to face with the newsmakers on RT.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to Washington, D.C. and talk with Kate Shepard, an environmental reporter for Mother Jones Magazine. Kate Shepard, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk BP oil spill. The government and BP say the oil in the Gulf of Mexico has almost entirely disappeared. Scientists say it's mostly still there. Tell us what each side claims and who's lying.
Well, this all started on August 4th when the government released this oil budget report that many interpreted as saying that, 3/4 of the oil was gone in the Gulf. I mean, we had the White House Climate Energy Advisor going on TV saying exactly that 3/4 was gone. But in actuality, when you looked at the report, it wasn't that it was magically gone. It was either dispersed throughout the water, 25% of it was still at or near the surface, and then, another 25% had either been removed or evaporated in some way or another. Last week we had a congressional hearing about this issue, and the head of this report at NOAA said, actually 3/4 of this is still in the environment. That interpretation that 3/4 of it is gone is just wrong. And we've had a number of independent studies come out in the last few weeks that said, a lot of this oil is still below the surface. It's suspended in the water column. It's out there in these plumes. It's not gone even if it's dispersed.
All right, now you're talking about disbursement, and of course that brings up Corexit. What is Corexit, and what is it doing out there?
Well, Corexit is this chemical dispersant of choice that BP was using throughout the spill. These are chemicals that are designed to break down and sink oil so that it doesn't hit land, so that it doesn't end up on beaches, it doesn't end up covering birds and creating all of those ugly images that we've all seen in prior oil spills. BP decided to dump 1.8 million gallons of this stuff on the oil spill, both below the surface and at the surface, basically for this reason, to keep the oil below the water. And, you know, if anything, these reports about how much of the oil is below the surface really validate the fact that these dispersants were quite effective at keeping it below the surface. That said, there's still a lot of concerns about, you know, what it means to have dumped nearly 2 million gallons of these chemicals into the ocean. The EPA and scientists have acknowledged that we don't really understand what that means in terms of long-term consequences for the Gulf of Mexico. We dumped a lot more chemicals in there than we really knew what that meant.
Okay, so 2 million gallons of Corexit. How many millions of gallons of oil is the estimate that has been dumped into the Gulf?
The estimate was about 4.1 million barrels of oil were dumped into the Gulf. Another 800,000 were removed either by siphoning or skimming it off the surface.
Okay, so now you add the Corexit, and the net effect is it more toxicity or less toxicity?
Well, after the spill began and after the BP had already dumped quite a bit of this chemical into the Gulf, the EPA undertook their own investigation of this. They've been releasing this data over the last few months now. Basically, they determined that the chemicals didn't make it any more toxic than the oil alone, but it obviously didn't help the situation. Okay,
so it seems irresponsible, to say the least, for a company to simply sail into the Gulf of Mexico and dump 2 million gallons of Corexit into the water for basically a photo op. You've got the President of the United States down there, I guess, posing in front of some shrimp and claiming that it's okay to go in the water. It reminds me of that movie Jaws, where the mayor was forced to stand in front of the water and say, it's okay to go in here. But, of course, the water was toxic and it was not safe to go in.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is part of a larger problem here. Basically, the way our oil spill pollution laws are written, you know, BP was granted the ability to dump these chemicals in there. The EPA didn't even have to know what was in the chemicals. It took us weeks to even just get a sense of what the chemical components were. They're protected by, business privacy laws, and they don't actually even have to let us know what they're dumping in the water. This is just part of a bigger problem with our chemical policy here in the U.S.
Right, and of course, reports are circulating that, quote, Blackwater-like mercenaries were dumping the Corexit in the middle of the night. So presumably, if the Corexit was safe, they would not need to traipse about in the middle of the night with some kind of undercover operation to dump the Corexit into the water.
Well, I don't know about the undercover operations. I mean, they were dumping plenty of it in the light of day with the airplanes and spraying it at the surface and injecting it below the surface. They didn't really have to do it secretly. They were not only allowed to, but it was condoned by the EPA. So the fact that at any other point in time, if we dumped this amount of chemicals into the Gulf, you'd think it would be a crime. But here it was condoned.
Right. That's, I think, probably an interesting point. Had there not been an oil spill to begin with, just dumping 2 million gallons of a chemical into the Gulf, there would have been an outrage. The fact that there was an atrocity already committed and that double atrocity, somehow those two cancel each other out. Instead, of course, the reality is it's a double atrocity. They didn't simply cancel one atrocity out. Now, the government has said that the seafood is safe to eat. Your thoughts?
Well, the government says the seafood is safe to eat. I think a lot of people are concerned about exactly what safe means. The standard they're using is 176-pound male, which, there's a lot of children and women and elderly and women who are pregnant who don't obviously fit that bill of a perfectly healthy 176-pound male. And the standards are also based on only eating, I think it's about 4 shrimp a week, which plenty of people eat much more than that in one sitting. That's not even a shrimp cocktail, basically. So there's concern that the standards they're using to evaluate safety are not really adequate, and there's also concern that they're not actually testing for dispersants. The FDA acknowledged that in a hearing last week. They said, they don't actually even have the methodologies in place to test for dispersants in the seafood. So while they might be testing for oil, we don't really actually have a great sense of whether or not there's dispersants that are getting into the seafood as well.
Man, human life is cheap in America, I tell you. Whether it's the 9/11 cleanup crew, the aftermath of Katrina, or the Gulf of Mexico oil spill cleanup crew, it seems like the government has the value on human life is near zero. What about the other economic impact this is having in the Gulf region? Forget about lives, of course. The government doesn't place any value on human life. But what about the corporate life? What's happening to the corporate values in the area?
Well, this is one of the interesting things here. When we look at the economy of the area, it's oil and gas drilling, it's tourism, and it's the seafood industry. Obviously, we know what this is doing to the oil and gas industry, but we also have people out there who are fishermen who are really concerned, especially about the seafood issue. They don't want to sell things to the public that they don't know are safe. So this is creating, a huge problem for them as well.
Let's talk about some companies here. BP, Halliburton, Transocean. They're allegedly they're behind a front group called, quote, America's Wetland Foundation, which was created to encourage celebrities and women to press the government to pay for cleaning up the Gulf. Sounds like a lot of corporate manipulation of the media and government, as they want to do. Is it legal? Are they still operating, this group, the America's Wetland Foundation?
I think they're still operating, and we don't really have any laws against front groups here in the U.S., which, they're basically allowed to promote this idea if they want. They had a little dust-up a few weeks ago when Sandra Bullock was in one of their ads, and someone called it to her attention that she was actually, inadvertently shilling for an industry front group, which they had then asked them to pull the ads. So I don't know if business is quite as good for them now as it was after that, but we don't really have any laws that are preventing them from running ads or staging grassroots astroturfing, basically.
Yeah, and I just heard Sandra Bullock is actually being recruited by the CERN Particle Physics Laboratory to run their scientific program next year. So she's got a dual role as a scientist and actress. A lot of people don't understand that. Let's move on to climate change. We were just talking about front groups. Who are Koch Industries? What do they do?
Koch Industries has basically their finger in everything. They're, a huge oil and gas conglomerate. They've been spending really big over the years on climate change denial, funding scientists, funding front groups who are actively undermining, consensus on climate change. They've also been spending big on just general conservative groups like Americans for Prosperity and, all of these so-called, grassroots groups that are out there leading the effort against the broader progressive agenda, not just climate and energy issues, but basically the entire Obama agenda at this point in time. These are people we all kind of can conceive of other corporate evil groups like Exxon. We obviously identify that brand name, but no one really knows who the Koch brothers are. They don't know what Koch Industries is, and they have no idea how much money they've spent on, basically seeding doubt on this issue.
So, Kate Shepard, if you could just mention, who are the companies out there with the most number of front groups?
I mean, the biggest ones we have out here, there's the Americans for Prosperity, which was leading a lot of this, tax-related revolt. We have the other big one out there right now is the American Petroleum Institute is, again, running these so-called energy citizens rallies, which are basically sponsored by the petroleum industry, but they want us to believe that they're grassroots citizen action, when in fact it's actually just organized by the industry itself.
All right, now this is an interesting situation with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce because presumably they're for business, and yet their activities to support front groups, to support climate change denial, of course, in the medium term is going to kill business. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the cost to the economy of cutting carbon use. Tell us what the costs are and what are the costs of inaction?
Well, it's often hard to quantify the dollar figure of inaction. We know that it's causing, all kinds of weather disruptions. It's going to cause, public health issues. It causes droughts and famines. I mean, these are huge concerns, which, often are hard to put dollar figures on. But we know that, over the next coming decades that these losses are going to cost us trillions of dollars. At the same time, you have a number of businesses who are out there saying, look, we want a price on carbon now. It's going to give us predictability and stability and help us, determine what our path forward is. So you've had a number of progressive businesses who've come forward and said, yes, we want to act on climate change now. We want a predictable path forward. This has created a problem within the Chamber of Commerce between these progressive businesses who acknowledge this reality and the people who are still stonewalling action. A lot of them big polluters or, just businesses who really haven't come around to the fact that this is, going to be a reality very soon.
Yeah, and we saw that in the UK. The carbon credits that were an attempt to price carbon emissions, there was an allotment that the UK government had, and then Tony Blair was giving them under the table to his friends to just make the problem worse. So, unfortunately, you have to solve the corruption in government before you try to create an economy that's functioning. Finally, Kate Shepard, bankers have destroyed the global financial system with what William K. Black calls control fraud. Isn't it a big problem that these same banker fraudsters are so front and center in the so-called climate change solutions?
Well, I think there are a lot of really real concerns about how you structure a carbon market so that we don't have the same kind of problems we've had with our other financial markets. I don't think those problems are unsolvable. I think a lot of people use that as, excuse not to do any action on climate change. I mean, you can act without creating a kind of vast, complex market that is easily gameable. It's not necessarily mandatory that we have this have a really corrupt market. I think you can act in ways that avoid that. There's a lot of talk about how you can do that in the debate of climate change legislation here in the U.S., but they still haven't actually gotten around to passing anything. So we haven't even really gotten to the point where we can figure out how to avoid that problem.
All right, Kate Shepard from Mother Jones Magazines, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks.
All righty, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Kate Shepard. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.